and welcome to a special edition of QUTV News. I'm Taryn Sargent. Today celebrates the 50th year of Title IX. Title IX was created to make sports and school equitable. So today we bring some of QU legends to share their experiences, as well as shed some light on the progression of Title IX. Well, thank you for being here, ladies. Can you kind of introduce yourself, what sports you played, and what positions you held either in the past or present here at QU?
I'm Linda Moore. I played soccer when I was here. In fact, we started the women's soccer program when I was here in 1979-80. And I have been an adjunct faculty at Quincy in the communications program, but right now I serve as city treasurer for the city of Quincy.
I'm Anita Krieger. I graduated in 1970, so I was pre-Title IX, along with Charlene, who was our coach of everything. When I graduated, I ended up teaching secondary school, mostly high school. I was at the same school for 38 years. I played basketball, volleyball, and field hockey when I was here, and I've coached track and field, volleyball, badminton, a variety of sports. I like anything that's active. Go ahead.
I'm Charlene Peter. I was Charlene Taylor when I came here in 1965. There was not, and I was hired as a physical education teacher, and that was my background, although I had had some college intercollegiate experience when I went to Eastern Michigan University and then did my graduate work at the University of Missouri in Columbia. But for all intent purposes, there were no competitive team sports. There had been some tennis matches and exhibition, but so I had played field hockey, and I thought, you know, this is a great sport to get started. It was kind of an even playing field. Nobody seemed to have played that, so I started with field hockey, and then that same year we started basketball, and the next year volleyball and tennis was already active. So, you know, within 2 years we had tennis, field hockey, basketball, and then volleyball.
So can you ladies kind of go into like when Title IX was implemented, how that had an effect on you, and like do you see the effects now, and just go into like during your time here at QU, how that Title IX affected you?
Well, it actually all started in 1965 with the Higher Education Act. When that was passed, that gave educational opportunities for so many people to get a higher education and to go to college that didn't have that opportunity before. So since then, you've seen a lot of first-generation college students. In addition to that, then along came women who said, hey, we want opportunity. And even before Title IX in 1972, we had women who said, just give us an opportunity to play. Give us an opportunity to participate. Let us exert physical energy to improve ourselves. So QU was actually, I think, on the forefront and started a lot of things before Title IX was even enacted on a national scale. Then once Title IX came along, that kind of became our backbone and gave us another check mark in our box to say, hey, we need this because. And it was no longer having to go and do it and then beg forgiveness afterwards. It was like, we want your permission to do this because it's the right thing, and by the way, now it's the law.
Well, I was in school in the 60s, so I'm pre-Title IX. But we were just a group of girls who liked physical activity. We were kind of discouraged from doing it. However, I came from the Chicago area, and the Park District was very active in the CYO, which was the parish schools, and some of the high schools played a few of the sports. So it was recreational. It didn't come so much through the schools. When we came here, I only played a few sports as a child, but I loved what I did. And when I got to Quincy, I was taking all the service classes I could possibly take to take the sports I had never played before. Plus, I had played basketball, I had played volleyball. never played field hockey, but I was out there when they put out the call, all physical education majors, we have a sport for you. And it became a social activity. It also became a physical activity. We just enjoyed what we were doing. And it was the time of the women's movement too. So women were pushing for equality in a lot of areas. It's very interesting that I went through that stage of it, and then when I was on the job market, my first job was in 1972. So they were looking for women who wanted to or had some experience in anything. The first job I had, they needed a gymnastics coach, and I said, well, I know a little bit about gymnastics. I don't know, when you're 22 years old, you think you can do just about anything. But the school was very cooperative in sending me to clinics and to help me. We were just doing compulsory routines at that time. So I was on the brink of all the things that happened. However, it didn't just happen magically. There was still a lot of pushback. Like we were guaranteed times, but I remember our first volleyball practices were 6:30 in the morning before school, because after school the gyms were available for the boys. And gradually there became more and more of a push. The conferences were doing actual conference competitions, so we had to have a practice time because the reputation of the school went on, not just what the boys were doing, but now the girls, what were the girls doing? So it was a very exciting time, and I picked up coaching track then. I didn't get the volleyball job until 2 or 3 years in, which was what I considered my sport. But then things moved quickly after that.
Well, I was before, during, and after. And both Linda and Anita have addressed, the situations of that era. The women just really wanted to play to begin with, and they enjoyed it. And, it was an extramural activity. We had intramurals. We started WRA, the Women's Recreation Association, and the women just really wanted to play, an opportunity to be out there. And as long as you weren't necessarily disrupting the status quo of men's athletics, it was acceptable. I know that Father Gabriel happened to be the president when I was here. And at one point, I had gone into his office for something, and he said, Charlie, you've kind of snuck this program in. But they really just wanted to play. And it was an outgrowth of, Quincy College also was one of only 4 universities, Catholic universities, that offered physical education. And if you look back on the beginning, most of the coaches, 95% of your coaches were physical education teachers. And all of the coaches were women. And then as Title IX came on, it opened a door, and you had sort of a seat at the table. Sometimes there wasn't a chair at that table, though. And so, you had to really exert yourself. You had to be somewhat aggressive. And make sure that it was out there that the women wanted to play. So, and Quincy College was receptive, as has been indicated, as long as you weren't disrupting things. And we had really no facilities. Our uniforms were originally just the pennies that we used for intramurals or for classes. And then we finally got our first uniform that has caused much discussion. But actually, Susie Longo, Frank Longo's wife, made those uniforms for me. And we wore those for a long time, and they went from every sport, from field hockey to basketball to volleyball. And then eventually, we got other uniforms. But
You just talked about discussion. Can you kind of go into that? Like, what was up with the uniforms?
well, we didn't. You mean well, it was a one piece.
Oh.
Yes.
It was like a jumper with a zipper up the front, sleeveless. We could wear a turtleneck underneath for field hockey. We could go sleeveless in basketball. So it was a multi-purpose uniform.
If you've seen pictures of your grandmother's PE uniform, that's basically what it was. Definitely very interesting material. It was a sign of the times.
Yes.
And Yeah.
We were very happy to have them at the time, but they became dated, and there was no money, so they survived many years.
So then in about 1970 or 71, originally the athletic programs were run under the AHPER and the DGWS, which was the Rules Association and developed all the rules for women's sports. But then the AIAW came into effect, and it was completely run by women. And they started having tournaments in the early 70s. And then with Title IX, like I said, you had a seat at the table. But there still wasn't really facilities or money available. The coaches drove the vans. There were overcrowded vans and station wagons we got lunches from the cafeteria. So it was almost a pay-to-play type opportunity. But then, as time went on, we got into more of a fundraising things. So the women would rake leaves, clean houses, doing a sundry amount of things. But, we were able to fundraise and make a trip to Hawaii. Basketball team took a trip to Hawaii. This was kind of mid Title IX. And then scholarships came in at about 1974, 75, 76. And I think that period of time might have been more of a growth for women's sports, particularly with AIW. Then as the market was out there for women's sports, and then speaking of market, Quincy was really way ahead of the time as far as media. Chuck Brady was the sports editor at the Herald-Whig, and he covered an awful lot of the women's games. And so, that made an awful lot of difference, that exposure. And so, that was a real support for the program. So that was a big deal. And he really was extremely supportive of the program and got us some notoriety.
So you guys have kind of all touched about it in your response, but can you guys go over like the memories you had of your childhood and what really got you to be like, I want to play sports?
Well, I have to credit my father. I have a large family. We started with 4 girls, and from the very beginning, he was throwing ball with us. And the park districts were very active. Every neighborhood had a park and a field house. I was also lucky to have a parish that had their own gymnasium, so that's where I learned to play volleyball. I don't know. I think it was just the feeling that you get when you exert yourself, and the competition, the natural competition that you have. It was just a lot of doors to go through, to experience.
For me, it started with outdoor play. I grew up in a neighborhood where there were only 2 girls, and the other little girl was into dolls. I never really was into playing with plastic princesses, so I wanted to play the sports or whatever the boys were playing. Every day there was some kind of sport. We'd play football, we'd play basketball, we'd play baseball or softball or, tag or, just races. We were always physical in our activity outdoors, and we did that from sun up till sundown. So I just always liked sports and always felt it was fun. When I got into junior high, though, I remember my mother saying, well, sports really aren't for girls. You should not be playing high school sports. She still didn't feel women should play sports. So I went the route of, pom-pom girl, cheerleader, dance team, and that was okay, but I always wanted to play a sport. So then when I got to college and had the opportunity to do some of the sports information and write press releases on the sports, and I met Charlene and I met the coaches on the men's and women's side. And I saw our men's soccer team as national champions. It was like, I want what they have. I want that national championship experience. At the time, I played intramural soccer, and our team was winning 16-0 and 20-0. We just didn't have any competition on campus. So that's when a group of us went to the athletic directors and to the dean of students and said, hey, we want to start a women's soccer club. You know, so that's how it started for me. I was never a great soccer player, but I loved the game. And I could tell by working with the teams that all of those women before me, we played for love of the sport. You know, that's truly what it was. And we had a saying at that time, we play the game because we like it, we play it well because we love it. And that stuck with me then throughout all of life. You know, that if you really like something, do it well, and it's going to show in your outcomes.
Well, I had a similar experience of just playing out on the corner lot, but I also had the opportunity of playing on the boys' baseball American Legion team, which was technically not something that a girl was supposed to do, but I was from a small town, and the coach was, I guess, maybe ahead of his time, and so he let me play. And so we would go around in an old bus to some little towns in Michigan and get off the bus, and I had hair down, or curls down to my waist, and they would say, is that a girl? And the coach would say, yeah, and they'd say, well, we're not going to play. And he'd say, boys, back on the bus. And then they would say, well, okay, we'll play against you. So I batted left-handed because my dad had indicated that you're short and you're quick, and it's a shorter distance to first base, so why don't you do that? So anyhow, that was really my first exposure. And, you know, competition is an interesting thing, as has indicated. You know, when it first began, girls, women just wanted to play, wanted to have an opportunity to play. Then they wanted to have an opportunity to compete. They got into a competitive mode and saw, you know, that side of it. And, you know, now with Title IX and all of the advances that have been made with that, and yet there are many, many to go, now's the opportunity for leadership. So, you know, play, compete, lead, and like I said, 95% of the women originally were coaches. But, you know, like in the media right now, there's only 5 to 8% of women in all of the media positions. And when Title IX started, there were like 300,000 kids playing. And when Title IX got in, it jumped to 3 million. So it was an incredible advancement. Right now, it's back to 45%, which is still only what the guys were doing in 1975. So, you know, there's been movement, and yet there's so much yet to do, especially in leadership roles in colleges and high schools, that there really are not necessarily, I don't believe, enough women in leadership roles, and there still needs to be some things done. If I could just share, Trish Hyland was here in in the mid-60s, and of course she didn't have, we didn't have Title IX, but she went on to become a significant person in Orlando area and was almost the superintendent of schools. But one of the things that she did when she became an athletic director, she said the head football coaches could not be school athletic directors. The school athletic director could not coach. They gave incentives for coaches that went on and got coaching degrees. And she put lighted fields on all of the softball fields that had baseball lights. And so, you know, those were those kinds of things that were stimulated by women and by Title IX to somewhat even the playing field. And I know I got way off of your question, but I just thought I'd add that.
Yeah. So what were the challenges that you guys faced yourself or you saw other women face, like going through sports during your time?
Well, I think I had a very positive experience at Quincy. So when I went into the high school, well, first thing was, 6:30 in the morning practices. And one incident I can remember, there were basketball lines on the court. So I got the floor tape and taped the volleyball lines, but it went right through the lane on the main basketball court. And I come in for the next day's practice, and all the lines are gone. They had torn up all the lines. So I went marching into, we had a good athletic director. I mean, he began to see, because he had a couple of daughters too, and I was hot. And I showed him, what he had done. And he says, I'll put the lines down. So lo and behold, the next day the lines were down. I don't know if he did it or no, he did it because he said, that's a terrible job. He says, we need to paint lines on the floor. So next time the floor was refinished, we got our volleyball lines painted on the floor because he had to go and do what we were doing to make the court legal for our sport. And just little incidents like that, and pulling some of the men into what we were facing, so a negative experience turned to a positive experience.
I remember I was the women's soccer coach at McMurray College the year after I graduated from QU. And I piled 21 people into a 1972 station wagon that I drove because we had no vehicles for women to go play another school. We didn't have any resources, so we all brought a sack lunch from the cafeteria, and I paid for the gas myself. But that was the only way we could go to a game to play another school. That was acceptable because we just wanted to play. And as Charlene said earlier, it started out, we just wanted to play. And then it became, we just wanted to compete. Now I think we're at that stage where, hey, we want equal opportunity, equal time slots, equal facilities, and more that's accepted, but we're not there yet. We still have a ways to go. And I think part of that change is reflected even in our mascot name. In the 60s and 70s, the men were the Hawks, the ladies were the Hawkettes. And then we became the Lady Hawks and Hawks. Now we're all just Hawks. And that's the way it should be, because that helps shape public perception that a male athlete and a female athlete are equal. They're different, but they're equal. And I think that's helped us a lot.
Like I said, it got us a seat at the table. It made the administration and other people aware of the discrepancies and the differences. And I think everybody was on board. Okay, we want to move forward, and we want sports for women. But there really weren't facilities, so now there had to be the use of time, which occasionally, and then coaches got on board and were a little bit more willing to share, especially if they were told they had to share, or there was some incentive for that. And budgets had already been set, so there had to be a give and take, and that's difficult. You're protective of your programs. The men were protective of their programs, and the administration, wasn't really aware necessarily of where the monies were, or how much the discrepancy was. So it took a while for all of that to work out. And men were getting more release time than women for coaching. I remember, I was teaching, all of the courses, and then you would have practice afterwards, or you were going to a game, and so there were those things. But now that's all been somewhat worked out, so there's much more parity there in that. But there's a ways to go yet.
So when you look at how sports look today versus how you played, what are the comments? What runs through your head when you think about sports right now versus when you were playing?
I'm so proud of them. There are women on this campus who have aspirations of playing sports after college. And that wasn't even a consideration 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And the fact that they can even dream of that and they can become that, and the fact that we have professional women's leagues in several sports, I think is wonderful. I also have to give a shout out to our women's volleyball team. This weekend You know, they're finishing up their regular season and they're going on to postseason play. We know that they're ranked nationally. I couldn't be more proud of them. And every time I see them play and just know that all that came before them has put them in a position to win and to get that national recognition for themselves, but for Quincy University.
What about you guys?
Go ahead, Nina.
Okay, if you kind of want to think about like your sports, is there any, because my mom once told me that she grew up in Iowa, and even when she was going from high school to college, you didn't used to be the usual 5-on-5. There used to, in Iowa, there was different rules for women.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever experience something like that?
yeah.
Well, I played through all of the basketball rules. Originally, it was 3-on-3. And then there were 2 rovers. So the 2 rovers could go the length of the floor, but the other stayed on either side. So you're either a defensive player to begin with or an offensive player to begin with. And then it was the 5-on-5. So, you know, it became the same game. But you speak of Iowa, and that is an interesting basketball story, because the high school girls basketball state championships grew more attendance than the boys did during all of that. And they were the last state to move from the 3-on-3 to the rovers because it was such a successful program. Anita can speak to the fact that, you know, originally, well, when I played volleyball, it was 9 players, and it was a Z formation, and you couldn't get out of your line. And then it went to 7 players, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the 6.
And multiple hits. When they had all those players on the floor, 3 players could play the ball, but each of them could have 2 hits in a row. So it was a very slow game. And then the 1964 Olympics changed volleyball for everyone when it went to a power game. They called it power volleyball. And we went to the bumping. And it was no longer an underhand, which is now called a lift. Yes.
It's illegal.
It's illegal. But, you know, going through that whole progression, and the game just exploded after the 64 Olympics, and that's our era. You know, so lots of things were changing. In high school, or no, it's grammar school, we were playing the 7 players, you know. So I've gone through the whole evolution to now it's just a different game, a different game.
I think it's interesting that many of the rules and facility sizes are still men's or the boys' size. You know, what would have happened if we'd have lowered the basketball net just a little to accommodate that the women, you know, there aren't as many 7-foot women as there are men. And, you know, the other thing, basketball, you know, occasionally, to begin with, there wasn't the 3-point play, the shot. So, you know, those, that made an awful lot of difference in the game and in the shooting. So, you know, that's a difference there, but everything else is pretty much the same. But
They accommodated the ball.
That's the size of the ball, you're right.
Yeah.
That kind of goes into my kind of last question. As we look into like the future, we see that like as of right now, for a majority of sports, men do garner more like actual audiences. And like, for example, if we just look at the NBA versus the women's WNBA, we see that they have more of an audience and they generate more money. How do you ladies see like fixing that problem?
I think it starts with relationships and building relationships with your prospective fans. I remember just a few years ago, probably about 8-9 years ago, the women's basketball team here drew as many people or more than the men's basketball team. I think you're going to see that again very soon. You know, the men's basketball team this year is going to draw huge crowds, but so are the ladies. And I think it's when players and coaches can get out into the community and develop relationships. A lot of those relationships have to start young. So develop the relationships with the grade school kids, because then the grade school kids are going to hound mommy and daddy to come to the game. And grade school students can't come on their own. They've got to have somebody drive them. So then all of a sudden, for every young lady you get in the stands, you're getting mom, dad, and maybe a brother or sister as well. And that's going to grow because they're going to come here, they're going to have fun, having promotions at those, and creating a true event around the competition is a great way to fill the stands and get cheeks in the seat.
We've battled with this all along. In the high schools, you know, it was all about, well, football gets all the money because they bring in the biggest crowds. And we tried a variety of things in the conference, you know, bringing the varsity girls and the varsity boys games on the same night, a variety of different changes trying to draw people in. And I don't know what the answer is because I don't understand it, because I'm just as excited to see women play as men play, but that doesn't seem to be, still doesn't seem to be part of our culture. I mean, it's a dilemma. I don't know how to solve it. And I do say it's financial, but it goes further back than that. It's not just financial.
Yeah, I think you're right, Anita. I think it is a cultural thing. But I do think it's an exposure thing also. You've got to have the same setting, same time frame. You know, everything has got to be similar in order for things to be even. But once there is exposure, once there is advertisement and people know what's going on and they see it, winning is important. You got to have a product. And once people see what the product of women's sports is, I think, you know, they will really rally around. It's going to take time. It's just going to take time and a little more work on everybody's part. But it will happen. It will happen. But and there have to be more women in leadership roles, and they've got to take leadership roles, and they've got to ask for more, and make sure that everything is equitable.
And we're not going away.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. You all are legends for QU, so thank you for coming here and discussing. I'm Taryn Sargent, and thank you for joining us for this special edition of QUTV News. For more content, find us on YouTube and at QUmedia.net. Have a great day.